Great. All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Give it a few seconds for people to join. All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to this live LGBTQIA+ in Tech panel with three amazing panelists who I will introduce in a minute. My name is MK. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Senior Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer here at CareerFoundry. We have a big group joining us today, so while people are joining, you can use the right-hand side to drop your name, where you're joining from, and why you're interested in a career change into tech. And if you're comfortable doing so, you can also share how you identify, if you're part of the LGBTQIA+ community, or whether you're an ally. And we hope that this will also act as a networking opportunity for you, so feel free to include your LinkedIn so you can connect with more people in tech and find community. Before we kick off, let me briefly introduce you to CareerFoundry if you're not already familiar with us. CareerFoundry is the online school for your career change into tech, providing personalized programs in UX design, UI design, data analytics, digital marketing, product management, and full stack web development. Our career change programs will take you all the way from complete beginner to job-ready tech professional with one-to-one access to both a mentor and a tutor who are both experts working in your new field. And our programs are 100% online and flexible, which means that you don't need to quit your job to do them. And they are backed up by our job guarantee. So that means if you don't land a job in your new field within 6 months of graduating, then you can get your tuition refunded. All right, that's enough about us. Time to introduce our lovely panelists. So please wave when I call your name. Today we have Abel, who is a product manager and marketing head at Out in Tech. We have Tamsyn, who is a technical product manager at Disney. And we have Lina, who is a senior UX researcher at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Okay, well, I'm sure you've all brought your burning questions for our panelists. So just a reminder to our audience that we will be having a live Q&A at the end. So you can drop your questions into the chat box and we will take them at the end. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Panelists, are you ready? Let's do this. Okay, so number one, I think one of the main questions that we get from people who are considering a career change into tech is, where do I start? So why don't we start by going around and each of you sharing what your path into tech was. And if you could say where in the world you're based as well, so our audience knows where you're from. Abel, let's start with you.
All right. Am I off mute? Yeah, looks like I am now. All right. Thanks. Yeah. My name is Abel. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. And my path into tech was somewhat untraditional. I studied cognitive science in college, and so not necessarily a tech-related major, but I knew that I wanted to get into the tech industry, and so I ended up attending a different coding boot camp called Alchemy Code Lab, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, learned a lot, and from that experience, I was able to get a job doing front-end development at a startup, and since then my career has grown. I transitioned into product and project management a few years ago, which was a very natural transition for me coming from the technical background. So yeah.
Am I muted? Can you hear me? Okay, good. Hi. Thank you, Abel. How about Tamsyn? Let's hear from you next. Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry.
I went off and back on, sorry. I'm Tamsyn. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a more traditional path into technology. I studied computer science in college. I was a software engineer for a number of years and started to pivot about 1.5 years ago into product management, and that's where my passion lies now. I love being the connector between the customer and the technologists. It's a really good role. It's not for everybody. You have to have the right personality type for it. I think you have to be able to build relationships and be able to negotiate. There's so many things that go into it, but I love it. It's a lot of fun, and I am really happy to be here and share my stories with you guys.
Thank you so much. And then lastly, Lina, could you tell us about your path into tech?
Sure. So my name is Lina. My pronouns are she, her. Yeah, my path. Okay, so I live in the US. I am from Eastern Europe, from Lithuania. So hello to everyone. If you're closer to those parts, I think the pandemic was a key moment for me because it was a time when I basically was wrapping up some teaching positions and roles teaching in the US. Media studies was the area where I taught. And then the pandemic hit. It impacted education a lot. I actually ended up doing a bootcamp in UI design with CareerFoundry. So that was my exposure to them. And I kind of was like hesitating what should be my next step. A lot of people change their careers in their early 40s, or that's a moment when you kind of start thinking, what do I want to do when I grow up? So I did the boot camp, and then I realized I have a PhD. And I thought that maybe kind of combining the experience of teaching, studying visual culture, the experience of the bootcamp, and then, my researcher's mind would be a clever choice. So that's what I did. And I have been working in various positions as user experience researcher pretty much since the pandemic, really. And then more recently, I have been a senior user experience researcher at the world's largest and oldest private cancer research center, Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. So I'm very pleased with this choice. I very much am a believer in sort of the public good of technology, a bit of an optimist in me. So yeah, that's been my journey. I'm very excited to meet everyone on the panel here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Lina. Yeah, I like that you were able to combine your background in academia with your tech learnings as well, and combine them into a role as a UX researcher. All right, well, next I would love to talk about being out at work. And, coming out is a very personal decision, and it's also not something that happens just once and then you're done with it. It's something that happens over and over again all the time. So keeping that in mind, I would love to hear from each of you. How has being out at work influenced your experience in the industry? Have there been any challenges or obstacles related to your identity in your tech career, and how have you navigated them? Lina, let's start with you this time.
Oh dear. Okay. I was thinking how to answer this question. MK sort of shared some questions that were on the docket. And I asked my wife, when in doubt, always ask your wife. So we were driving. My wife works in healthcare. She's a midwife. And then we were driving, and we ended up talking, what is it that being queer gives to you as a professional? And one thing that she said was that because you spend so much time through your existence navigating the predicament of categories. What does it mean to be in a box? What does it mean to think about various systems and the ways in which you don't sort of fit within them or end up navigating them? Almost by default, you sort of end up kind of expanding and exploding anything that requires a structure or a linear thinking in your work. So it's sort of like my meandering way of, answering what does it mean to be queer and to work in the tech. We never asked that question from heterosexuals, right? What does it feel like to be heterosexual and work in the tech? I do think we should start including that question. I'm joking, but I don't know. I think it just means that you're open to that you're just open as a person. You are willing to expose yourself to a certain sort of sense and degree and dimension of openness. What does it mean to just, be more open to uncertainty, which I think very much sort of aligns with what, for many people, like currently, there's a lot of predicament, precarity if you work in the tech, right? If you have worked in academia in the past, or like myself, or if you are queer, you kind of live with precarity, right? At this point, it almost doesn't matter in what part of the world, really. I live in the U.S. and we've had basically 500,000 of anti-LGBT bills introduced just this year. That's more than one bill per day. Someone is obviously very busy, right? So it really doesn't matter. But that sort of notion of openness, what can you do when you are of such a mindset? I think that's sort of like a superpower almost that you bring, and maybe that's what being queer at work gives. And I know we inhabit that queerness. I use this sort of as an umbrella term. I define myself as a queer person mostly, if in English. If it's other linguistic context, then we get to the interesting nuances. But I think it just taught me to be more open to the world, to different situations, to different experiences, different existences that we may have been exposed to. And that, I think, is a shapeshifter. It really impacts how you just, navigate the world and professional life as well. So, I think that's where I'll cap myself. I notice a pattern in my communication, so I'd love to hear from Tamsyn and Abel.
Thank you, Lina. No, I really appreciate what you said, especially about openness, because I think it does require a sense of vulnerability that we don't really ask from our heterosexual colleagues who, we don't really ask them to come out and tell us about their relationships that they have in their personal lives, right? So it does require a sense of openness and vulnerability to come out at work as well. Abel, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I think for me, being out at work really just means like being your whole self and bringing all of your queerness with you to the workplace. And so I think one of the terms that that we use in different communities is code switching. And so essentially that's in this context, it could be trying to fit in by acting straight, or acting in a more hetero way. So it's definitely there's an internal battle of bringing your authentic self to work and not having not being afraid of presenting who you are. And I think that's important to remember, to be your authentic self.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's such an important term to bring up, code switching, because you might feel comfortable being your full self in certain environments, but not in others. And you sort of have to choose which communities you feel comfortable being your authentic self in and which not. And it can be hard to parse out which is which. Thank you, Abel. Tamsyn, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so code switching is definitely a thing, especially when you're trans and you're trying to fit in and not let anybody find out that you're trans. For a long time, I worked at my company for 23 years before I came out as trans. That was in July of 2021. What I didn't realize at the time was how much energy and effort goes into code switching, and how much that lifted off of me and being able to focus that energy back into my work I felt like I was really doing a lot greater things in my career, and it really did allow me to make that pivot into product, which I wanted to do, because I became, being authentic, I became more confident as well. It was really a weird switch. I was completely accepted within my work. I had the support of everybody in my organization, from the CEO all the way down, or CIO all the way down, rather. So I had no worries about that. I didn't have to worry about, anybody being hateful or anything. It was pretty easy. We had an amazing group of DE&I professionals that really transformed our company in 2020 and 2021, and really allowed me to be able to do that, because frankly, I wasn't ready, and neither was the company at that point. And then I switched teams when I changed roles, and everybody on that team just knew me as me. So there was no need for that. And it was like such an easy transition. And the same being now with Disney, it like I was hired in as me. Everybody knows me as me. It's just, I'm Tamsyn. That's who I am. I'll end there.
Thank you. Yeah, what a powerful story as well, because I think it's important to remember that having a community in which you feel like you would be accepted makes it a lot easier to come out. Like you were saying, like if you didn't know that the company was ready, you might not have felt safe coming out to the company, or maybe even to yourself. So I think that can be really helpful to have a community that cares and that will have your back. Thank you all. All right, so I think it's helpful to share our experiences with any challenges that come up when we're out at work. But I also want to be mindful to not only focus on a deficit lens, but rather also celebrate being proud of being queer. So especially at a time when queer stories are being actively silenced and erased in schools, if you're keeping up with the news in the US and probably elsewhere, I would love to take some time to talk about what unique perspectives, experiences, or even superpowers you think that LGBTQIA plus individuals and our stories bring to the tech industry. Why is it important to center queer voices and stories? Why does it matter? Tamsyn, let's start with you this time.
I think the answer for that, for me, is we bring empathy, because we have to be empathetic to each other in the community. We bring resilience. We've been through so much. We are able to absorb things and move forward and bounce back from challenges. I think it really informs our work. I think it allows us to look at it from a lens of, all right, so this didn't work. How do we make something work from where we are? How do we fail and move forward from that failure? I think that's a big part of what we bring to the tech community. So yeah, I think that's a good start. Let's see what others have to say.
I love that. Yeah, resilience, empathy, excellent. Let's go with Lina.
So in terms of, what is it that we bring to the tech industry has a certain legacy and a history, which obviously in many cases does boil down to just, basic exclusion, who has been part of the table of decision making, who has been the expert, who has been the leader. Even if you just think of sort of basic sort of gender disparities, if you like, within the tech, we know that if you're not a cisgender man, you're kind of like unlikely to. It's very unlikely to see such individuals in the leadership, in the C-suite, right? I believe I think the number is that right now there's like in the STEM 1 in 5 roles go to essentially non-cisgender men. So there's a lot of discrepancy. There's also pay discrepancy, right? I'm very much interested in the notion of labor, who does work. So I suppose awareness and kind of a reality check of what is that industry in which we live without waxing too poetic about it. That's important. So I can also speak about like my field. I'm a user experience researcher. Gender parity wise, it's actually quite, one could say that there's quite a bit of that in my field. That being said, I often think about the role of user experience researchers as sort of the people who help to kind of account for the past mistakes. So we often do kind of the cleanup. I work with a lot of women in my line of work, and it just seems that we're just cleaning up a lot of mistakes done in the past by cisgender men when it comes to technology and systems created by them. So that's interesting. Funding that goes to tech, especially venture capital, notoriously has gone to essentially ideas generated by cisgender men, often white, often coming from the global north. So we kind of land as outliers, I suppose, in this industry. And I think that's so what do you do when you land in this kind of environment? And also how do you know when to just kind of like realize that perhaps you cannot change everything because the system is so broken, how not to get burned out. That's something that I've, really been interested in. I've been, talking whenever I get a chance to kind of use a larger audience. I think it's really important to account for the basic burnout that a lot of queer people go through, even in the month of Pride. I have to say today is actually the anniversary of the Pulse shooting in 2016 when 49 people were killed in Orlando, Florida, in a gay club. So whenever we think of June as a Pride Month celebrated right now in many countries, I think it's really important to just come to terms. How do we come into this month? What does it mean? What does it mean for queer people, especially? And if you think you're an ally, someone has said, I think it's important to think that, have you named yourself an ally, or has someone trusted you and actually from the community said that I think you're an ally, you really, do the work that an ally should be doing. So self-appointing oneself as an ally doesn't exactly work, right? Yeah, so I don't know. So maybe a bit of a reality check is what we bring sometimes. And obviously you have to be very clever. How do you use that professionally so you don't sabotage yourself, right? So maybe when do you need to stop? When do you need to be careful with what audiences do you talk to? I have myself also in the past sort of suffered for bringing up maybe the right things, but to the right audiences. And you just, have to, it's always good to find mentors. It's hard to find mentors in the tech. So, but it's good to seek out for them. So if anyone sort of, needs that, you know how to find me using LinkedIn. So that's what comes to mind when I think of your question, MK.
Yeah, that was lovely, excellent answer. Lot of really important points there that the queer community can bring awareness and a sense of accountability to the company, because there's a lot of data out there that I think the queer community keeps in touch with and knows, like, this is how many people are earning this and that, or how many people are in top roles, etc. That I think is a good sense of keeping accountability for the company. But as you said, it's also hard to know what the barrier is, what the boundary is, so that we're not putting too much of that work on people who already might be feeling marginalized and might get burnt out because they have to constantly be the ones that bring up that issue. It's important to know that there's an awareness there, and also that there have to be boundaries there in terms of how much work we can expect our queer colleagues to be doing. Thank you. Abel, how about you?
I think I want to just build on what Tamsyn said with empathy and resilience. I think those are super important. And then another one that I would add is just joy, a sense of joy. I think especially now when there's all these laws, anti-LGBTQ laws passing, and just, yeah, a lot of negative things happening in the news cycle. It's important for us to show up with joy and show that we are a resilient community, and bring that into work, and be able to spread the joy and the empathy. And I think those are all important things that we can bring into the workplace.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's absolutely true, that there's a sense of radical joy that the queer community can bring, because there's been so much not joy sometimes in our lives, and I think that can be a really powerful way to sort of turn that around, and bring a lot of joy and delight to life and the workplace. So as Lina was mentioning, it is Pride Month, and it's really important to remember why it's still important to celebrate Pride. But it often means that a lot of companies will end up engaging with Pride in a sort of superficial way, like changing their logos or putting out T-shirts with the rainbows on them, and that's it. And it's really only for capitalist reasons. So I'm curious to have a conversation about, how do you think companies and allies and individuals as well can authentically engage with Pride Month without exploiting the queer community? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. Let's go with Lina.
It's always me or Tamsyn going first. I feel like we need to disrupt this. Oh God. I'll make it short. I think you really don't need to be a very kind of hardcore Marxist to understand that capitalism has its own evils, and that at the same time we can't eject ourselves out of the system in which we are, right? Which is capitalism. So yeah, companies using Pride Month. I mean, it's not just Pride Month, right? Black History Month in the US always brings up also a surge of companies sort of suddenly caring for a population which might not be represented in their leadership, in their just workforce also. So I don't know what to answer to this question.
I know, sorry, it's a difficult question.
I mean, but there's also like, so the Marxist in me is like, like this is bad. We should be like, alert to these the way capitalism abuses populations. Always minority subjects are being abused by the capitalist system. But at the same time, I think there are moments like right now because I live in the US. We've also seen, for instance, how some companies try to sort of support LGBTQ plus community, and then suddenly kind of withdrew their initial plans. A roadmap kind of backfired, I suppose. So it happened with Target, right? So, but that's not how allyship works. Like if you don't risk, that's not allyship. Which is also interesting. Large corporations always has risk management teams, departments in some cases. I mean, so maybe it's time to perhaps, start including the potential backlash to your support of minority subjects and our communities as part of the risk management plan, right? Hospitals prepare for hurricanes, floods. How about if we come up with a little plan that you might have if someone says, oh, no, you shouldn't have a rainbow flag on your storefront in June. Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm thinking about in terms of, corporations and Pride.
Yeah. And I appreciate that it's not an easy question to answer. And I think that's why no one really knows how to engage with this problem. But I think that's why it's an interesting conversation to think through it and to, come up with ideas or just start exploring the thought. But yeah, it could very well be the answer that like, well, we live in a capitalist system and there's no way around it. But I'm curious to start thinking or imagining new possibilities if possible. Abel.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lina brought up a great point about like thinking about what Target did recently and how that could easily have been avoided if they had, like, within their risk management plan, a plan for the backlash, which like in the current US political environment should have been expected. And so I feel like that was where they really dropped the ball, is that they didn't have a plan in place to already protect their employees, and yeah, they ended up just kind of doing damage control after the fact. So yeah, that's one thing that corporations could do. I think another big thing is like putting their money where their mouth is. Like, I know a lot of big corporations have been exposed for, like, changing their logos rainbow during June, and then people finding out that they have spent millions of dollars contributing to politicians that are passing these anti-LGBTQ plus laws. And so a lot of it is like holding those companies accountable for their actions, and really, like, encouraging companies to actually donate their money towards progressive causes and directly towards queer and trans organizations, rather than funding the people who are continuing to oppress our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think putting money where your mouth is super important, especially during Pride Month, because it shouldn't all be about trying to get money, from just being like, look how inclusive we are, but it should be like, you actually should be supporting the community as well. And I like that you brought up as well the risk management plan. I think there was a similar case in the UK recently with, I think Oxfam put out this ad. I don't know if you've heard about it, but they put out an ad for Pride, and it included, like, sort of talking against the enemies of Pride, and one of them had a pin that said TERF, and then very quickly they got a lot of backlash for using the term TERF, and released, like, an apology statement saying, like, we apologize for using the term TERF, we want to support all philosophies. But then they got a lot of backlash for that, because obviously that they shouldn't just backtrack that and be like, oh, we actually support all TERFs and non-TERF, like, it's just bad. So I think when we think about our risk management plans, it's important to sometimes just take a stand. And if you're going to be supportive from the get-go, you're going to have people who are not going to be supporting you for that, but you have to sometimes just take a stand as a company and stand with our queer colleagues. So it's important to remember that too. And lastly, Tamsyn.
Yeah, I'll really follow on to what was already said. I think that the risk mitigation plan would have been important to have in place for the Target situation. I do understand their need to react to the threats to their employees. I get that, and I don't hold them wrong for that. I think that's the right thing to do, but I think they could have followed up with that and done a little bit better job of communicating what they were doing out better. And the news media basically spun it in ways that, weren't reflective. My local Target store, their Pride display is still front and center because we're in a state that it's acceptable for that to be there. So I think that the other part of the equation is what Abel said about, funding politicians at the same time you're changing your logo to rainbow and you're promoting all your Pride merchandise or whatever. I think that's a big disconnect. I think some of the bigger companies play both sides of that equation too much. And I agree with, Lina, we are in a capitalist society, and that's kind of the product of where we are, because they do what they do to they fund politicians to make their lives better, essentially, as a company. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. But I think you need to be able to support your employees. You need to be able to support your customers who identify as in the queer community, and put that front and center and stand by that. I think that's where we're not seeing that allyship in a lot of places.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as well. I guess what I'm hearing is that it's important to focus internally on making sure there's allyship and support in the company, not just posing externally as somebody that, or as a company that is supportive of the queer community, but making sure that it's happening actually in the company. Yeah, absolutely. Which actually is a good transition to our next question, which is about how to build more inclusive communities in tech. So my question for you this time is a bit broad, so you can respond to whichever part most resonates with you. But generally, I'm curious to hear, have you witnessed positive changes or progress in terms of LGBTQIA plus inclusivity in the tech industry? And what areas still require improvement? And then what steps can organizations take to foster more inclusive and supportive environments for queer people in tech? So have you noticed a change? What can we still do? And how do we do that? All right, Abel this time.
All right, thank you. I think I will start us off by addressing the last part of that question. So, like, what are some steps that organizations can take to foster a more inclusive environment? So, from my personal experience working with out in tech, I've seen like a lot of support for LGBTQ plus individuals in tech, and I think like some of the ways that we've been able to make progress there have been like fostering a sense of community through having both virtual and in-person events, and also having programs that like encourage LGBTQ plus folks to get into tech. And so like we have a mentorship program for queer folks, and that has been a big success so far. And yeah, and then we also like engage directly with corporations, and so we have a partnership program called Corporate with a Q, and yeah, so it's allows out in tech to like consult with those companies and their ERGs, and then like in return, those companies get like thousands of queer folks to apply to jobs and get referrals at those companies. So that's another way that we're able to support and uplift our community. And yeah, I think like encouraging those companies to have inclusive hiring practices is a big step towards fostering more inclusion within the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you mentioned about having mentorship as well. Mentorship, better hiring policies, and just maybe even just joining a network, making sure that there is a network of people that you know are out and can be a support network as well. Next, let's hear from Lina.
I made some notes as Abel was talking. One term was brought up. I'm not even sure if it's as widespread outside of the US. ERG, so employee resource groups, often started by the people who want to be represented at the big table, so to speak. To be honest, it's so weird. My current employer is where I sort of I am not part of an employee resource group, but I feel like the company sort of amplifies and elevates both queer voices and really, the voices of various minority groups represented at Sloan Kettering in so many other ways. I feel like sometimes the ERGs can be a bit of a Band-Aid for companies. So, we do these little meetings, weekly gatherings. Let's discuss what problems we have. Let's see, what can be put on the roadmap. The roadmap never happens, and we kind of keep rolling. And you're blessed if you actually live in the state, again, sort of in the context of the US, where benefits, let's say, cover you and your partner, regardless of what's sort of the makeup of your family. So yeah, you know what I'm thinking? What is it that companies in tech could do, or companies tied to tech? We keep kind of bringing up this notion of tech. We might just maybe acknowledge that these days, like, it's kind of hard to have a company without the tech component, right? So, so I'm sort of like on this overlap between healthcare, science, biotech, and technology. I think official policies is probably the first. Things written in documents, things for which you can be sued, things for which someone can use as sort of advocacy, right? So your benefits policies in the context of the US, things that are a little different than if you live in Europe and are part of one of the EU countries. So that is also not an umbrella safety net. I am from Lithuania, and I'm going to just throw a stone into my country, which has been tippy-toeing for 10 years. We haven't seen any positive laws that support LGBTQ plus people in my country, even though by European law, we should have support for same-sex partnership, for instance. But in my country of birth, the ring that I have and my marriage is not a thing. But can companies, let's say, in places within the EU where perhaps same-sex partnership is not legalized, can they extend their benefits policies to people in partnerships with a same-sex partner? Yes, they can. We actually started seeing precedent for that in Lithuania. The parliament hasn't been making the right steps to acknowledge families like mine, but actually one of the unicorn companies in Lithuania, Vinted, has recently, with consultations with local activists, actually changed their benefits policies. So you will get healthcare benefits, maternity leaves, what's the word? If someone passes in your family, you will be given time off. So this is a good example of actually extending support and thinking a little bit sort of creatively, maybe also in terms of how you can genuinely support the people that work for you. I do want to also like maybe one more thing is how venture capital is operating and what gets funded. The argument of not being a good fit is often used for companies started by essentially non-cis hetero men. We don't have a larger market for this. No one is going to use this product, and therefore we actually the number that I tracked through some of past references that I've used when I was teaching media studies, 97% of venture capital ends up going to initiatives started by cis hetero men. And maybe that's part of the reason why tech is so broken. There is a way to look at it this way. So what is being done if you are in a position of power and you can actually think creatively of what will be the technology in the next 50, 150 years? Will you then sponsor someone who's visionary but perhaps doesn't come from a dominant culture? That's another way of how you can support people that have been historically underrepresented.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, definitely we need more visibility and representation in tech. But I like what you were saying about how, I mean, even though we are a joyful group, it's not all about, ERG pizza parties. There needs to be policies in place that support the LGBT community politically and with actual real benefits. So I really like the example that you gave from Lithuania, where it is possible, even if the local policies don't support LGBTQ couples, the company itself can do that, can find ways. I think Tamsyn, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to add. I do want to say that out in tech was a large part of my journey to coming out. I started there in, I think, March of 2021. That was really my first step outside of my comfort zone on LinkedIn, was to join out in tech community there. It was impactful in a lot of ways. I made some seriously strong relationships out of doing that. Tech is heading in the right direction. It's still challenging. When I was looking for work, I had to basically pre-vet employers based upon what their EEO statements were, and then if that wasn't enough, then I'd look at the board makeup, I'd look at leadership makeup, and I would determine if it was a fit for me. And if it wasn't, I wouldn't even waste my time applying. And I think those are important things. Lina touched on, the anti-discrimination and anti-harassment policies. Those are important to have in place, but they can't just be in place as words. They have to be words with backing. If you violate this policy, you will be terminated. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think I felt that way in my previous company. I think that really enabled me to be confident and be able to come out. If it hadn't been that way, I don't know, because my state is not a state with protections for LGBTQ employment. So there's a lot of things. We need companies and we need tech leadership to push those kind of things in the policy area as well. I think companies are a little lax in getting involved in policy debates. And I think they need to be more involved. I think they're going to look at what's going on in Florida with my company now, and that's going to be kind of a bellwether as to what happens in the future.
Yeah, I think that will be a really interesting case. I'm curious to see where that goes, but for sure, to back up policies with actual action, or back up our words with actual action and policies. And I think, I think what you mentioned about being part of a network that helped you feel safe in your coming out process, I think is also important to remember, is that having these networks is important. And also we have to back it up with policies. Okay, and then for my last question, before we go to the Q&A, I want to think of people who are considering a career change into tech. And what's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who is considering a career change into tech? It could be specifically LGBTQIA plus folks, or allies who want to support their loved ones as they transition careers, or in general to anybody who wants to go into tech. Up to you. Tamsyn, let's go with you this time.
My advice would be to look at the landscape, look at what the roles are, look at your transferable skills, see where you fit, and try to map out a plan. It's doable. There are a lot of people moving, especially from education into tech. I know that's a big funnel of new folks joining tech. But don't just go into it like, I want to work in tech. Have a plan, have an idea where you want to land. Find a mentor that can help guide you. That's important as well. My director several years ago saw in me that I could be a product manager before I saw that I could be a product manager. So she handed me a stretch assignment to push me in that direction. And you need people You need sponsors like that can really help you find yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we definitely need sponsors for sure. And then Abel, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I would just expand on what Tamsyn said. I think finding a mentor, that's definitely an important aspect when you're transitioning careers. I think also just finding your network and expanding your network through organizations like Out in Tech, and there's tons of other organizations out there that are supportive of folks that are either transitioning to tech or already in tech. And so, yeah, I would encourage you to seek out those organizations and meet as many people as you can. And oftentimes folks are very open to connecting on LinkedIn and like having a further conversation, and helping each other out is a big part of success in this industry.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, starting to build a network or finding support groups like Out in Tech would be a good start as well. And then Lina?
So a lot of good advice given and examples of good leadership. Really, good leaders always see what you can become, right? What, like the example that Tamsyn mentioned. I want to say, for queer people especially, we're often we might live with experiences where we're told you're a failure, you're not enough. If you desire to change your career or to pivot and seek out for a place where you think you could professionally thrive, you're not a failure. Many people change careers. Actually, 40s is statistically a very frequent era, right? Where people decide to sort of start businesses of their own, seek out next opportunities. You're not a failure if that's where you are right now, and you seek out for a place to thrive. So, kudos to you. Keep going. Another thing I want to say, and also sort of tied to queer existence for a long time, maybe sort of the creative industries have been the draw for queer people, right? We're the actors, we'll give you the music, the literature, the movies, take us out. There's going to be no culture. So it's just going to be a blank screen, and maybe screens even not so. One of the founders of contemporary computer science was a gay man, Alan Turing. So there you have it. No screens either. Without us, nothing. But that the creative, those industries as a window of opportunity were because we were just historically excluded from other places, right? You found a place to express yourself. So I would encourage to think of yourself as, belonging to this legacy and ancestry of creative energy, and be creative with that career search. One thing that I've discovered in my own professional path, there are titles of roles that I never thought existed. Be creative with those keywords. Keep exploring, find, people who inspire you, look at the keywords in their careers and how they describe their professional path, use that as inspiration, send a note saying, this was awesome, it really inspired me. Support goes a long way, any kind of support at this point. So yeah, you belong to a very creative legacy, and, keep going, and you're not a failure if you want to pivot. There's nothing wrong with pivoting.
I love that. Yeah, ending on a very encouraging note there. That there's nothing wrong with pivoting. It's never too late to switch careers, and there's a lot of support that you will find in the community, and that queer people are everywhere. So you have no shortage of finding a community as well. Well, thank you for answering my questions. It's time to turn to our audience questions. We have a few on different platforms, so let me just gather them here. We have one from Daria, which is, do you have advice on what questions to ask a potential employer at an interview to understand how LGBTQIA plus friendly they are? Yeah, any advice you would, or anything you would specifically look for when choosing a company to apply to? And I'm going to open up the floor. Anybody can answer, so just jump in if you have an answer.
I think I stated this before. Look before you even interview, get level set on what the company stands for, understand what they're about, what their EEO statements are. And then when you get into interviews, ask how you'll be supported, ask whether there's ERGs, ask what their policies are, ask how connected the DE&I folks are to leadership. If DE&I is a subset of HR, that's a red flag. DE&I needs to report into the CEO in that chain. It cannot be an arm of HR. It's a completely separate operation, and it should be.
I would like to add to that last comment. It's so important to because that placement of officials in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, I think is another acronym these days. That means, do you have agency to change the company culture? Because if you are somewhere in the footnotes of HR or something, then probably that means you won't see cultural change. I remember when I worked for my previous employer, you wouldn't believe it, how many emails and Slack messages it took for them to figure out how to have the diacritics on my name show up on the tools that I was using internally within the company. And you really, it's not rocket science. The bulk of internet runs on the systems, and some of you are much better experts at naming them, that makes these diacritics a default. So my company's tools were so outdated. And the thing is, I was referred to our DEI folks as if this was this is not a diversity issue. This is like just basic. Like, I'd like my name to show the way it is in my paperwork, please. Just doing homework before the interview. Be curious. This is also an asset. It will set you up for success in an interview because you will actually know about the company for which you're applying. So be over-prepare for this, over-prepare, looking for what's out there on the internet. It's amazing what you can find, if it's on the internet.
Yeah, I love what both of you have said. Do you want to keep adding to it?
Yeah, I'm going to add on one more thing. So network into the company as well. Get to know people that work there. They can give you the absolute details on what is going on, how involved the ERGs are, all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It's great that you have contact with a recruiter maybe, but go with somebody else in the company as well and ask, okay, what's really going on? What's the culture really like? And yeah, try and find somebody who is part of the community that you're looking to move into as well. If they have an ERG, you can reach out to the ERG. Some of them don't have those publicly listed though, so it can be hard to find. Yeah. Thank you. Abel, do you have anything you want to add to that, or?
No, I just added something in the chat. Definitely, agree with Tamsyn. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, we've got another question here. What are some good ways to find a mentor, and what quality should we look for in a mentor?
I think one of the important things in finding a mentor that's a good match with you is finding somebody that shares at least one identity with you. So, for example, if you are a queer person, finding somebody who's also queer, which is one of the great things about Out in Tech's mentorship program is like everybody is queer, and I think that like having that like sense of identity is really important for like the mentor-mentee relationship to help guide to help guide the mentee through certain experiences that they might have, and like answering any specific questions that might have to do with their identities. And and then I would say, like, another important quality in a mentor is somebody who is empathetic, and somebody who really listens to you well and supports you in all of the different ways that they can.
And someone that asks you the hard questions as you're going through the process. They can't just be saying, yes, do this, yes, agreeing with you along the way. They have to challenge you.
Right. They have to push you to grow.
And sometimes like a gut feeling is a good way. In addition to these great suggestions that were mentioned, go with your gut. You're getting a good vibe. If you feel like, I'm not sure, like, yes, we do share some experiences, but like I have nothing in common with this person. That's possible, so go with the gut. And also I absolutely encourage to look for people who don't just beat you down, but who are, it's really not that hard to say something positive about you, about your work as a mentee, someone who, works with a mentor. I have, so this is like a shout out to my my colleague Chinyan Ma, who's a principal UX researcher at Sloan Kettering, who's been so generous with, giving positive feedback when there is a place and a time for it. And it really makes such a difference, just kind of hearing that someone said, you actually did a very good job. And if you have some additional things, then a good mentor will always start with, praising you in public. That's one rule. And keeping the things that maybe where you still need to improve for the private conversation. So that's like a golden rule. Learned it from my wife, by the way, also. So, and also another thing, if you don't come from a privileged background, it may feel weird to look to ask for mentorship. I remember that from working with students. Some just, never came from a place where someone could offer them advice on, how to prepare a resume, how to prepare for a good presentation, even though they were immensely talented and some of the most talented people I've worked with. So asking for mentorship, for advice, I used to wrap up some of my semesters by saying, just wear the confidence of an average white guy. So that's the advice I give to people sort of seeking out mentorship. It's nothing wrong with that. Just keep going.
I love the honesty there. Cool. Okay, so we have another question here. Do you think that we are teaching future tech professionals how to consider and prioritize the needs of queer users for the products that they develop? If not, then how can we do that?
Do you mind if I start answering this? It's something that we have spoken a lot in my past role, and because I work in healthcare, and healthcare as an industry has a bit of a history of exploiting queer communities, right? Whether the diagnostic statistical manuals used by psychiatrists or various entry forms where brackets of categories are just, outdated and need a bit of an update. I think there's so much room for improvement that it's kind of almost hard to understand where to begin. I don't think we have enough training in terms of, preparing leaders to think about just the vast experiences of the people who use any technology. Whenever a company accounts for that vastness and diversity, it always succeeds, right? That's just a business case. The companies that are thriving right now are accounting for that. They're finding ways to serve the diversity that is our planet Earth. So it's a business. It's a diversity. Let's put it this way: is a business case. It's not just about inclusion. It will help your business thrive. But do we have enough ways to sort of account for the fact that various queer people might use products? Absolutely not. 1 minute where you can actually see that very evident is any sort of self-identification forms, right? Male, female. It's sort of like at the border. Because often, regardless of, Germany just passed, I think, Gen X on the passport, but once you go to the border, things boil down to the binary, the classic Western binary that's just like, built in stone. Now, how we might expand that binary, that's another question. In my past, I remember my past employer was sort of thinking how we can diversify the pool of people with users with whom we talk. And they were thinking we're going to ask them to self-identify, leave an open-ended question at the end of the survey. And that's where my current experience is really sort of gold value. Generally in healthcare, if you don't know what you're going to do with that data, how you're going to store it, how you're going to make sure that it's going to be safe. If you don't have ways of analyzing it, you do the minimum damage, and you don't collect that data. Data breaches are real. They've been happening. They've been also happening in applications that are extensively and expensively used by queer people. Grindr had a massive data leak a couple years ago. So these are sort of some things to think about, that it's more than just creating an additional checkbox. Are you L, or are you Q, or are you a plus in the acronym? I think we see now with the artificial intelligence, we just don't have the framework for thinking about these concepts, which were not on the table for a very long time. And that's where back to what Tamsyn was saying, it's important to trace back, where are those DI people in the company? Are they where the decisions are made? Or is just a little footnote in some department? There's so much work to be done, and so much damage to be repaired also.
Yeah, I think the three of us are fortunate. We work in fields that will contribute to that change. I know product is, we have to create user personas and understand who all of our users are. You have the same thing in user experience. I think that we get to be a part of that change. We get to drive that change, hopefully.
Cool. Just trying to leave some room in case anyone wants to speak up. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's cool to know also that you have that within your power as well. You're not the sole decision maker in a lot of these situations, especially because in tech you do a lot of collaborative work. But knowing that you're there to speak up and to bring up that perspective is so important. And then the more that you speak up about it, the more that you inform the people around you, and then that they will as well, and whatever other projects that they're collaborating on as well. And so setting an example can be important there as well. And then I wanted to just briefly touch on the mentorship question earlier, and just acknowledge that sometimes it can be hard to find mentors if you don't have anybody in your nearby community, especially if you live in a country where maybe it's not as acceptable to come out, or it's just not as common. And so in that case, I would consider, going onto LinkedIn and trying to find people there. It can be difficult to find a mentor because not everybody is out on their profile. But if you are looking into working at a specific company, you can find somebody who's very vocal at that company and just reach out to them and ask them, hey, do you know anybody at your company who is LGBTQ plus, and you could connect me to them? And then they can ask internally. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that already is out. You can ask them to connect you to somebody else and just start that conversation. I think people would be pretty responsive to that. And if they're not, then that company's not for you. Okay, let's go to our next question. Somebody has asked about imposter syndrome. So let's talk about that, because I think that sometimes comes up in the community as well. If you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, it's when you find yourself doubting your abilities or feeling like a fraud, especially if you're starting a new project or a new career. And we all encounter this feeling at some point. So I'm curious how what advice you would have for our audience on how to tackle that feeling of being an imposter.
That's such a personal thing, though, really, to get to the root of that. For me, it's always been a problem. I'm a lot better about it now that I am living authentically. It's that part of me is not invading my doubts and things. I was laid off in February. It was about a week of getting through all the emotions that go along with that. And then I just dialed up my confidence. I don't know how I dialed up my confidence. I wish I could bottle it because it was there. And, just remaining confident in what you can do. There are always going to be days when you don't feel like that, but go back to your wins, go back to your use your resume to help guide you and say, these are the things that I've done in my past. These are my accomplishments. These are what I'm good at. And just try to refocus yourself on that. It is a slippery slope, and it gets impacted by things within your professional life and outside your professional life. It's a really delicate balance to stay on top of. But when you're going from a place of being confident in your abilities, it's a lot easier to navigate things.
Can I add something? I think Tamsyn is the bravest of us to sort of start talking about the imposter syndrome. Those especially who have experience in who just got any education, that it's real. It's very hard so it's very easy to be sort of overwhelmed by smart people around you and to think that you're not worth it, that you're just not as smart. Things like that. So I've had phases too. I can tell you things that help. Fake it till you make it. It does work. I have seen so many not great presentations done by using exactly zero research, zero data, but by people who just looked very confident. Not everyone enters the room and owns the room. And there are reasons why some of us might, feel more sort of set up for success. The loudest voice in the room is often not necessarily the most insightful, the most educated voice. So, just keep that in mind. Fake it till you make it. In some cases, right? Also, if you're able to use the term, be the authentic self, be yourself, it will kind of show off. Eventually, people will it will come through, not show off. That sort of authenticity that you bring to any space, any team, any company, it will come through. So just be that, because if you're not, that I'm kind of like negating everything I said, right? With the fake it till you make it. But there's a certain, whatever is the energy that is you, just, keep going, because that is what has made you, right? That is what has brought you to this point in life where you are right now. Just, use that as your strength, as your superpower, if you like. And also something very basic, having like an extra pair of eyes really helps. So whether it's like a resume you've been polishing for months on end, for which, by the way, there's no scientific proof that it becomes better. So just stop polishing and put it out there, apply for the job. Sometimes it's just a checkbox in the application process. Sometimes, the reason why people land good roles is just a coincidence. Things line up. Someone leaves, they need to hire someone. So it might not be because you polished your resume to infinity. But having an extra pair of eyes always helps. Sometimes, a friend can also be good. But you can definitely reach out to the people that you kind of like and identify as maybe like your gang, your someone who sort of sounds supportive. Showing your documents to them is also good. So that's sort of my 2 cents on like living and surviving through the imposter syndrome.
I would really I would add on to what Lina was saying about channeling your like inner energy. I think that's super important in tackling the imposter syndrome. Just thinking about like all of the wins, both little wins and big wins throughout your life and career, and channeling the like the feelings that those bring up, and reminding yourself that that you have all of these strengths, and that you bring those to whatever you're doing. And yeah, I think that's definitely a key in like getting over the imposter syndrome hump.
Yeah, totally. And keeping up maybe a list of all the qualities that you know you can bring will make you feel more confident, or you can fake it till you make it. And I think part of that is also remembering that, you know, if you're applying somewhere, your resume doesn't have to be perfect. It's better to send it in than for it to be perfect. So sometimes being our full authentic selves means that we're not going to be perfect, and that's okay. Yeah, well, I think that's all the time that we have. So thank you all for answering our questions. And thank you for being so engaged throughout the conversation. Before we go, let me just briefly remind you that this month we're offering a tuition reduction on all programs except data analytics. But if you're interested in UX or UI, product management, web dev, or digital marketing, you can book a call with one of our lovely program advisors. And there's a link in the description, either in the chat box here or on YouTube, it's below. But yeah, thank you for coming again. Thank you for each of our panelists for making the time and for being role models to future LGBTQIA+ individuals in tech and allies. And thank you for all that you do. It's been lovely having a chat with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.